All right, AP Lit, this is your introduction to our next class novel, Their Eyes Are Watching God. We're reading the second semester of 2021. So I wanted to just briefly go over some things to save us a class period of me saying things to you. And that way, if we talk about it here, you can go back and access it kind of whenever you need it. So over the next few days, you guys will be taking your books or getting your books, picking them up from school or kind of getting them on your own. Their Eyes Are Watching God is a novel written by Zora Neale Hurston. It was written within the past 100 years, which is different from the poems that we've been reading lately. And usually when I teach this book, we read it as a companion to The Awakening. So we go back to back. But because we've had this time in between, I think this will be a nice way for us to also remember some of the finer details from The Awakening, which will help you as we get closer to the AP test as far as remembering some of these larger texts that we've studied together. So first thing that you need to know, this is a book that's about one woman's coming of age journey. We read something very similar in the storyline of Edna in The Awakening. So a lot of the things that you're going to see, a woman, how she starts to define herself independent of the men that she is with or the man that she is with, those two novels have that in common. So the way that I broke this book up, and I will attach the document that I'm looking at, this reading journal guide, to the post, is I broke this book up into sections, 3 different sections based on the 3 different men that Janie is with in her life. And Janie is our main character. So your due dates, the first section, chapters 1 through 4, is due March 2nd. Chapters 5 through 9 is due March 11th. And chapters 10 to 20, our largest section, is due March 23rd. Now that's the week right before spring break. So we are going to finish this so that you won't have anything hanging over your head over spring break. And in fact, the final test over this book, March 26th, that's the Friday before spring break. So we're really going to make sure you've got everything together. Now, in the past, there was an essay, a large essay that would come as a result of this book. But because we are now in the second semester and we're getting closer to the AP test, what we're going to do to still help it be relevant to preparing you for the test is at the end of this book, you guys are going to consider The Awakening and Their Eyes Are Watching God, and you're going to create an analysis outline. So rather than writing an essay, you're just going to do what we've done with the independent drama project and what you'll do at the end of our poetry unit, which is I'm going to give you a prompt, which is highlighted in bold here, and you are going to outline how you would put this essay together, which is really nice for you because then you don't have to go through the trouble of identifying quotes and finding specific examples and actually writing a paper. So as we read, on each of the due dates, we will first have a discussion over the book, and our discussion will largely be guided by you. So this is an example. Every year when we read this, I will put the chapter that we are covering, and you guys are going to put observations or questions that you have over those specific chapters. So for example, the first set of chapters, we're reading chapter 1. These are some notes that people picked out, and I'll also add to these to make sure that you are understanding. What this is going to do is anything that we don't get to discuss in class, it'll also give you the chance to review, because the day after our discussion over the assigned reading, you guys will take a quiz. Now, the quizzes will not be like the final test, which is multiple choice. The quizzes are going to be more holistic. So if I do a quick, brief overview, you can see here, they really just consist of 3 short answer or extended answer questions. And so it's not something that, I have to, make sure that I remember all of these little details, but it's just kind of thinking about the section as a whole. So, for each of these reading assignments, like I said, you'll have a discussion doc that you will add to. And the following day, you will have a 30-point quiz. All right, 3 questions, 10 points each. Our big question that we are looking at as you guys read in the text, how is the protagonist's awakening developed? So we talked about with Edna in The Awakening. The awakening is really like getting some clarity about your role in the world or your purpose. All right. And we saw Edna, we had that big discussion at the end of it. Did she or did she not find her freedom in the end as she walked out into the Gulf? We're going to have a similar question by the end of this book with Janie. Did she or did she not find her freedom? All right. Is the character successful in her awakening? How can you tell? How does this success or failure develop the meaning of the work as a whole? So to clarify for those of you that weren't paying attention, you are not writing an essay about this prompt, but rather you will outline, this is how I would put together a comparative essay with two texts. So there is a chance that on the AP exam, one of the questions, the prose section, which is where they give you a passage or a poem, you might have to compare two titles. And so this is getting you ready for that. On any of the essays, if you were to have to compare two things, how would we go about organizing that? In addition to your 3 quizzes that will come after a day of discussion, you guys are also going to be answering some CRJ questions. Now, CRJ questions, you remember, are longer responses and things that require some thought. Because this is an abbreviated, or not even abbreviated, this is a weird year, I've modified some of the expectations. So when this is posted, I would make sure that you read through directions. But it does say for each of this, or for the CRJ questions, you must have one quote chosen that you believe supports or develops your opinion for what the question is asking. It has to include a page number. It has to include context, meaning who's speaking, who is this person speaking to, what are they talking about? And it needs to have how it relates to the question being asked. So, for example, and then I have a nice example for you here. Here's the page number, here's the quote or the explanation of the scene, and this is how it relates back to the question as a whole. Now, what am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about these 10 questions that will be posted. During our reading of this book, you will be responsible for having 5 of these answered. And it even says so here. So it's a test of your ability to read directions. All right. You have to answer 5 of the 10 questions. So it's kind of a la carte. Pick the ones that you think you understand the best, the ones that you think you have the best quotes for and the best explanation. All right. So as we read, here are your due dates. Quiz. You can bet on 2 days after, or a day or 2 days, depending if it's a Tuesday or, there's a Wednesday in between. After the due date is when you will have your 3-question quiz. At the end of the book, March 26th, you will have a close reading test. And that is also when you will have your due date for these 5 CRJ questions. We will have the essay outline sometime in the week before or right when we get back from spring break as a kind of a way to ease back into things. So that's a brief overview. Another thing that you're going to see attached to this post where this introduction video is an introduction and a close reading of chapter 1 of this book. So things that I think you should be aware of. It says the foreword written by Edwidge Danicat can offer context and frame the story for you. But on the other hand, it allows you to have prior knowledge of the thematic elements going into the book. So I'm going to attach a link to this. Some of you in the text that you have and the copy of the book has a foreword, meaning read about it ahead of time. And it gives some details about the author's life and kind of why she wrote this book, the point of her life that she personally was at. It also gives some information on Zora Neale Hurston herself. Now, unfortunately, in the grand scheme of authors and kind of how their lives play out, a lot of authors don't really become well known until after they've already died. Zora Neale Hurston is like that. She was actually, during her life, better known for being an anthropologist, and it was Alice Walker who kind of campaigned for bringing these works of Zora Neale Hurston, her short stories and this novel, to light. She went on a quest, found where Zora Neale Hurston's grave was, paid to have it made much more elaborate for kind of the work that Alice Walker felt that Zora Neale Hurston brought to the world. And so this is just a brief overview. You can read about her life. It will definitely help you. Fun fact, she finished the novel that we are reading in only 7 weeks, which for those of you that need some kind of a frame, we spent about 6 weeks writing a 3-page essay first semester. So it's pretty amazing that what we're about to read was put together in that amount of time. It's probably because it was a work of passion. All right. The close reading of chapter 1. If you remember, before we read The Awakening, we stopped and we went through chapter 1 so that we could characterize Edna's husband. We could pick out some important motifs and symbols. That's what this document is going to do for you. So I encourage you to look through this because this is really going to help you. It starts from the first sentence. This is one of the most well-known sentences in all of literature. in a book that has a female protagonist, the first sentence focuses on men. Ships at a distance have every man's dream on board. For some, they come in with the tide. For others, they sail on the horizon, never out of sight, never landing until the watcher, capital W, turns his eyes away in resignation, his dreams mocked to death by time. That is the life of men. So, in looking at that first sentence, things that are standing out, because this is establishing our focus for the book: distance, never, resignation, mocked, death. What do these standout words, this analysis of diction, tell us? Well, men are practical. They have dreams, and as they realize that these dreams might not come true, there's a long shot, they turn away from them and go on with more realistic pursuits. All right, things that I would consider: why are watcher and time capitalized? Well, it's not always that we're talking about God here, right? But the fact that it's in our title, maybe that ambiguity of the watcher lets you know something. The next sentence in chapter 1, immediately following, shifts, and now our focus is on women in the secondary. Now, women forget all those things they don't want to remember, and they remember everything they don't want to forget. The dream is the truth, then they act and do things accordingly. So, how does this comparison, this opening comparison of men and women, really help us to think about what Zora Neale Hurston is going to write from here on out in Janie's story? Some standout words: forget, remember, truth, accordingly. So what does this mean? Well, unlike men, women don't acknowledge that their dreams seem far off, where men might see, oh, I want to be an astronaut one day. I'm not really good at science and math, so that's never going to happen. Let me just enter into a more practical profession. Women see their dreams as the truth. They live their lives much more idealistically than men. So we begin the novel with a description about this fundamental difference between men and women. All right. So other things to note that you can look through on this opening point of view: we start out in third person. So to throw some English words at you, we've got a frame story here. All right. We've seen a frame story before in some of our short stories. So that's going to be significant. I want you guys to note as you read the difference between the narration and the dialogue. The narration is going to be very eloquent. It's going to flow, be easily to understand. It's going to be descriptive. The dialogue is written in a very specific dialect. Zora Neale Hurston, as an anthropologist, was an observer of life and of groups of people and cultures. And she spent a lot of time in Florida looking at indigenous people in Florida and in different islands around the Caribbean. And so the dialect that she is able to pick up on is something that some people struggle with. I would recommend, number one, if you can't figure out what a character is saying it out loud, because sometimes hearing it, you can decipher it better. But number two, I'm going to give you guys a really fabulous audiobook that you can read as a companion, or you can listen to as a companion to your reading. All right. But just noticing the difference between that, what is the effect of that change? Why not just write the whole thing one way or the other? All right. And then as this document goes on, there are some other thoughts that I think you should be aware of going into this. Now, at the bottom of the page, it gives you a brief overview. These are the really important things I want you to know. Chapter 1 characterizes the relationship between Janie, her best friend Phoebe, who is her audience for this frame story, and the townspeople. So we actually begin this book at the end. Janie's whole life has happened. Her 3 marriages have happened, and she is sitting down to tell her best friend about what she has been through. In the meantime, the only other thing we really know about Janie is that she is really being judged by the other people in this town. They're known as the Porch collectively. And so this judgment, we're not really sure why this is happening. Some motifs that you're going to see, and this is what I would keep track of because these are some things that your CRJ is going to ask you about. The motifs of appearance, right? Janie's hair, the outfits that she wears. Games, as in like the games that people play, literal games and otherwise. Nature, which is the big one, and it can encompass a lot of different things. It's kind of this umbrella term. But you're going to see references to the horizon over and over again. You're going to see, especially in chapter 1, when Janie is talking about her childhood, references to a pear tree, right? How she is like a pear tree. Different animals. So this would be like when there's mention of a donkey and kind of this separate storyline about a donkey, pay attention. And then the weather. All right. There's also motifs of community and then silence versus speech. And then I have a note here. The novel begins at the end of Janie's story, but it is frame story, not a flashback. Storytelling in and of itself is another motif. Because a lot of these different indigenous groups that Zora Neale Hurston studied when she was, doing her anthropologist thing, a lot of the things that she learned came about through storytelling. So that in and of itself, the fact that Janie is telling her story and we have her perspective and point of view is very important to our overall understanding of this book. So you have these two attachments, the reading guide instructions and the introduction and chapter 1 close reading that I would recommend you look through today on this Wednesday because you have some time and there's nothing hanging over your head. And then be on the lookout for, as your first due date approaches, I'm going to post a sheet for Their Eyes Are Watching God discussion number 1. It's going to be a lot more blank than this is, and you're going to fill some things in so that we have a focus for our discussion. If you guys have any questions along the way, please let me know. But otherwise, this was just kind of your introduction to where we're going next. All right. Have a wonderful day.